We need a corporate revolution now, or maybe even yesterday, because current ways of dealing with so much work stress and continuous change are just not sustainable. To survive and thrive, work and workplaces, as we have always known, has got to change, and soon. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my podcast, A Corporate Revolution, where we learn from leaders and teams thriving in corporate chaos. My name is Sabrina Sauja. I'm a certified leadership coach and team consultant. So, welcome, David. Thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.
So let's jump right in. Why don't you introduce yourself briefly, highlighting your leadership experience and anything else you want to share with us as well?
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and I went to Queen's University where I studied chemical engineering. And then I entered into industry, working in the paper manufacturing industry, which I worked in for 28 years. And 25 of those were on the production floor in some variety of leadership roles of either shift supervisor or technical assistant or superintendent or operations manager throughout my career. But it turned out that that was an industry that wasn't growing. And I left the paper manufacturing business after 28 years and moved into the nuclear business, where I worked as a project manager and an engineering manager for 14 years. And then I retired from that in the spring of this year, at the end of March. And now I'm acting as a coach and a retired grandfather and father and husband. One of the things that happened in my management career at the nuclear facility here was that I got the opportunity to train as a coach and to coach people internally at our company. And that was a great opportunity. And I'm trying to use that skill set in my retirement to help people who are new and emerging leaders.
And that's an interesting background. So you've had one transition from one industry to another, but also I'm wondering how that training as an engineer and the process improvement side shapes your leadership or even your coaching now.
It was integral to how I've become who I am. One of the things that I have practiced over my career, particularly with regards to continuous improvement, is lifelong learning. And I took a leadership course back around 2010. One of the people giving the course said, "Leaders are readers." And I really struck with me. And I've taken on the practice of reading all sorts of types of books on leadership and continuous improvement, time management, goals management, etc. And that's really helped me a lot. The other thing that I learned through my career is that as a leader, you don't really do anything. It's the people that you're leading that do all the work. So it's my role as a leader to facilitate things for them so that they can get the work done that they want to do, that they need to do, and do it in a fulfilling way. So that works for them.
Right, right. So I remember when we first met, we were, I think, in a coach training class.
Yes.
Right. And this is the one thing that really stuck with me about your leadership style, David. I think we were in a triad, and I don't exactly remember what you said, but what I really took away was that, oh, this is a leader who really cares about his people. There was something you said, and I think I've observed it over the years after that as well. I
True enough.
wonder where that comes from, and is there anything in your life or experiences that has shaped you as an empathetic leader?
Well, I think it really falls back to my personal faith, and I practice my faith as a Christian seriously, but that's impacted me to be a servant leader. So that's my leadership model, is to do what I can do to help my people. They're my primary customer because, as I said earlier, they're the ones who do the work. But I had the job of knocking down barriers and getting them the things that they need, getting the cooperation from others that they needed so that they could achieve the goals that we were tasked to achieve. So in that, I only had a couple of rules in my role as a leader.
Mhm.
And the first one was that family comes first. And how does that play out? It plays out that when you have a sick child or a sick spouse or a sick parent or something like that, then you take care of them instead of worrying about work. I remember in a role that I was in the late 2007, 8, 9 area. My son, we'd moved from one small town where there wasn't any football to another larger city where there was football. And my son was in his last year of high school and he got to play football, which is something he'd always wanted to do but couldn't.
Mhm.
And because of work commitments, I only got to see him play in one half of one game. And the rest of the time, I couldn't leave work because of work commitments.
Hmm.
And that was really frustrating to me. So I always thought that if somebody has something that they need to do for their family, that should come as a high priority. And especially if there's an emergency, everyone else on the team would step up and help that person out, take the job from their hands and complete it so that they could go and take care of their family emergency. And how it worked out was that there was an incredible amount of loyalty because of that.
Hmm.
And everybody knew that if it happened to them, they were going to have freedom to take care of their family. And so we just practiced family comes first, and it worked out really, really well. And the other thing is that if the phone rings and your child's been in a car accident, you're going whether or not the company likes it.
Hmm.
So I supported that instead of saying, oh, no, what about your work? Because that wouldn't have been putting priority on the people. My other rule was I don't care when you're here as long as you're here when you need to be here.
Hmm.
So people could had the freedom to work 4 days a week or 5 days a week, whatever worked for them. They could work from 6 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, or from 10 in the morning till 6 at night, whatever worked for them. So if they had the flexibility to make medical appointments and dental appointments and other engagements. They could leave early to go to a child's piano recital or sports activity. And they were mature and responsible individuals, and I treated them that way, and that worked out really well too.
Yeah, they were empowered to
Yes,
be
they were empowered
themselves.
to manage their own time, and they would always come and say, is it all right if I do this? And I said, well, why are you asking me? Sure it is. Turn people down
Yeah.
from that.
So,
And it also means that when the phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning and there's an emergency for work,
mm,
you don't roll over.
yeah, so it's give and take.
Yes, there's a little bit of both.
So the first rule, so these are really interesting rules, and I wrote them down as well. The first rule about family comes first, and I totally agree with that. And I feel like your values very much shape your leadership style, your values as a person. The barrier I've seen, at least in my experience, is that when people take time off or do other things, there's no one to cover, or there's less capacity, or others on the team don't know how to do their job. I
Yeah.
wonder how you work through those things.
Well, it's a tough challenge at times, especially if your organization is extra lean. That is like everybody's trying to get lean. But when somebody leaves the organization or is off sick for a significant period of time, then you get leaner and it gets harder
Mm.
to cover off other people for their activities.
Yeah.
But what we did try to do was make sure that everyone was aware of what was going on in their colleagues' work baskets. And sometimes I would have to stand up and say, no, this deliverable is late because so and so's had a family emergency and it's just going to be the way it is. We would work around it later to catch back up, or we would be able to say, I'm going to reassign this deliverable to someone who is going to be able to pick up the ball and take it. Because we worked in teams, so there was always somebody who was familiar with the type of work that they were doing, but not necessarily familiar with the details of the project that they were working on. But people could take over, and the supervisor could reach out and support the person who was gone off sick or what have you. So we need to recognize that when you leave the company for any reason, then it's like taking your hand out of a bucket of water. And 5 minutes later, it's like your hand was never there. All the ripples are gone, and they get on with getting on. So we would do that. And occasionally I had people leave my department for other opportunities in our organization. I would have people who would suddenly go home sick and be sick for quite a while. For instance, I had an administrative assistant who got hit in the head by a hockey puck at a game where she was watching her nephew play. And I don't think she's ever come back to work. She got a severe concussion and was off work for at least a year, but hasn't come back to the workplace as a result of that. But we had to adapt and spread the work out and do things that she used to do and just carry on. It's that British technique of keep calm and carry on. It's what you have to do at times when things don't go well. There are always going to be surprises. And as you manage projects, one of the risks that you have as a project manager is that someone could win the lottery and decide that they don't want to do this stuff anymore and they're not coming in tomorrow. So, and in that way, you need to be prepared for the unexpected. Otherwise, your project goes in the tank.
Right. So it's having that long-term view and knowing that there are risks and planning for them and having some level of cross-training at a high level, right? You
Yes.
said the team, they work in teams, so there is some understanding. So let's talk about a high-performing team and how you define it and how would you measure if the team is high-performing based on all your experience?
I would look at it at a couple or three metrics. The first one is your key performing indicators. Are you meeting your deliverables on time and on budget with the appropriate level of quality? The amount of rework that you have to do on the product that you're shipping, whether that's a dooflicky that you're making, or is it a report that you're writing, or a plan that you're putting together? How much rework is there involved? So are you making good quality product? And the other thing that I'd look at would be turnover in your department. What levels of turnover are there indicates that people are or are not happy. So some turnover is healthy, and you have to look at it on a case by case basis. If someone is ready for a new opportunity and they get the opportunity, that's great. But if they're leaving because they're not happy, that's not so good. And want to address those issues and understand where the opportunities for improvement are. Every year, at the end of the year, I would do a survey with my staff, an anonymous survey, and ask them three questions. What should we stop doing? What should we start doing? And what's one thing you would change? And two things we should start doing and one thing that you would change. And then I would compile all that stuff, and I would find out things like people didn't like the morning meeting. And so we would revise or eliminate the morning meeting and do something different to communicate so that it would free up time. And other people would have ideas of what we could do to address issues and so forth. So give people a chance on a regular basis to give feedback. That was very helpful to me as a manager to chart new courses.
That makes sense. I think you touched on a really key point there. I hear this when I work with clients as well, that there are all these surveys done, but sometimes we don't see what happens with it. But it seems like you were actively looking at it and changing things because that's when people want to give more feedback as well.
It's important to take the survey that you're going to do. And this was an informal survey only with my own staff. This wasn't like a big corporate thing. And when we did corporate surveys, we sat down and looked at the results and said, what do we have to do? And I would integrate that in a big meeting with my team, somewhere between 15 and 40 people, depending on which role I was in, and say, here's the things that we're challenged with, and here's the things that we could improve on. Let's do some brainstorming and come up with ideas, and we'd make some changes on what we could do as a result of them. And that was very effective.
Yeah, looks like you got the team to really participate in their future and what they were doing versus it being top down.
Another thing that I did that was very helpful, I was off work for 2-3 months with knee replacement surgery. And while I was off work, I read about one-on-one meetings and how to do them properly and do them well. And so when I returned from my knee surgery time off, I implemented these one-on-one meetings, and I did them every week. And people said, how can you do a one-on-one meeting every week? But what I found was that having one-on-one meetings with my direct reports every week saved me time. it reduced the number of break-in meetings that I would have with people who would come by and say, oh, I need to talk to you for a few minutes. So you'd have to stop what you're doing, deal with this, and then try to get back to that. And in the whole process, you would lose efficiencies. But when there was a scheduled one-on-one meeting later in the week, frequently they could say, I'm going to bring that to my one-on-one. And the one-on-one meeting was for them to talk about whatever they wanted to talk about for the first 15 minutes or as long as it took. Then I would have 10 minutes to talk about what I wanted to talk about. How is this project going? How's that going? How's your work-life balance going, etc. And then the last 5 minutes would be for their professional development. Is there anything we would look at charting where they wanted to go in their career, how they wanted to develop, what training courses we could find for them, what books they might read, et cetera, et cetera. Or if there was an area that they were struggling in, we would talk about that and how their improvement activities were going. And they loved having the meetings and people didn't want to cancel them. If I had to cancel one, I tried to move it forward in my schedule instead of later in my schedule, which wasn't always easy, but I wanted to send the message that this was an important meeting to me and not to cancel one.
And then you said there were 30 minutes, right?
They were 30 minutes long.
I really liked what you said about the leader being able to focus and how these meetings help with that, because I hear this a lot. Because as a leader, as a manager, you do get interrupted quite a bit. And most leaders feel like, oh, I'm not doing my work. I'm always helping my team. They understand it's important. But I think this is a really good strategy to hit that balance and be effective overall.
And the biggest challenge for most managers is they've got too many balls in the air. They are scrambling. Their work-life balance sucks. The number of deliverables that they have to provide updates for or get delivered continually grows. Nobody in any organization that I've ever heard of says, I wonder how we could take some load off of our people. We need to do more instead of we need to do less. And I understand that. I get that. We have to get more productivity, especially in Canada, where our productivity isn't what it should be. We need to do a better job of streamlining our processes and fixing things so that we do excellent work excellently all the time. That's our standard instead of, is it just good enough to push off our desk to the next person and let them fix the mistakes? So I think many managers are struggling with their confidence level, with what they're doing, how they're managing their time. So what I did to help with that was I created 30, 60, 90-day plans, which came out of our annual objectives. So I would have a goal for what I wanted to get done this quarter. Each of my particular areas of responsibility, which I would have 7 or 8 areas of responsibility of what I wanted to get done. And then I would break that down in order to say, in order to get this done by the 31st of March, I need to get so-and-so done by the end of February and XYZ done by the end of January. And in order to get that done by the end of January, what do I have to get done this week? And then I could strategize my week a little bit and say, I'm going to do some deep work on this on Tuesday afternoon and block the time out of my schedule so that I could do the work that needed to be done. And then I met with my staff on a regular basis. Weekly, we had a half-hour meeting with each of my divisions and said, where are you on your projects? And I would be able to keep track, and where they needed support, I would give them the support that day, which was important to be able to say, if somebody's waiting for a report from another employee in the company and they're not getting it, how are they going to complete their duties? How are they going to complete their work? And in engineering, there's always things that are required from other people in the organization. So I would call up that person and see, hey, how are you doing on that? This is an important deliverable for my guy. And is it possible for you to get that to him soon? And frequently that happened. And if it didn't happen, if it didn't work, then we would adjust our schedule accordingly to meet the time that we had available. Another practice that I did frequently, as in our meetings, I'd ask people as an icebreaker, who's somebody that's helped you this week? And when somebody would give me an idea, somebody would say, oh, so and so was very helpful to me this week. What I did was I sent that person an email thanking them for how they'd helped my person. And I told them that they were doing a great job and making a difference. And I copied their boss so that they got some kudos and their boss knew they were doing a good job. And people really appreciated that feedback.
Right. And that's like there are two tracks I'm seeing, right? There's the internal relationships within the team that you're managing, but also there's that external piece that helps your team work better because there are all these interrelationships with outside teams.
And that's true. And it was my experience that in business, work gets done through relationships and communication. And you have to work on building relationships and work on communicating. And those of us who come from a technical background, where we had calculus flowing out our fingertips like Spider-Man's webs, accounting, or it's technical in nature, never took a course in university about how to communicate. And then when you get out in the real world, that's how you make your living, is how you communicate. So it's a skill that people have to spend some time working on. And I would recommend people take Toastmasters courses, take writing courses, work on that skill set so that they can be empathetic and accurate conveyors of information. Because at some point in time, you're going to have to convince somebody to spend money on your project, convince somebody to take on your project and say, yes, that's something that we should do. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen, is it?
Yeah, I think communication should be taught to everyone, maybe in high school or somewhere there where everyone
Absolutely.
gets the chance to learn it. So one of my questions were going to be about what you think is a top challenge in the working world today, but I think you just answered that. I think it's that work-life balance, right? Or the lack of it. And then what I heard was the way you have solved it or gotten close to solving it when you were working is through more planning. Is that right?
That's true. But I think there's other challenges in our industry or culture right now. I'm thinking of respect, transparency, and vision are really challenging because if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, it's really hard to get passionate about it. And if you don't know, if people are not communicating to you and you're like a mushroom in the dark, then it's really hard to get passionate about what you're doing. So that goes back to the respect that companies have for their employees. We need to treat people with respect. We need to communicate to them. We need to be transparent and say, this is what our challenges are. This is what our goal is. This is what our mission is. All those things have to be done and we have to be passionate about it. Every employee should be able to say, what I am doing supports the mission of the organization. John F. Kennedy, I don't know if you remember this story or not, but John F. Kennedy was walking in the Space Center and he asked somebody what they were doing and they were mopping the floor. And the guy said, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. So he knew that keeping things clean and neat and organized was helpful to people who needed to not slip on something on the floor and hurt themselves so they couldn't do their job. So everybody has to be able to see what they do contributes to the mission of the organization. And I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, I think that's where engagement motivation is going to come from. And I also think there's a lot leaders can do to connect those dots because sometimes it's hard for a team member themselves to connect those dots because they don't sometimes have visibility to those high level KPIs or visions or goals.
But we should all know what the high level goal is. You're in the business of making widgets. You want to be the best widget maker in the country or on the planet. And it seems funny to me that almost every company that I've ever heard of has in their statement about vision and mission and so forth that their employees are their key resources and blah, blah, blah. The employees make the difference. And then they treat them like that's not true. And that's hard for me to understand. If you say your employees are the reason you make the difference, then you should treat your employees like they make a difference.
Yeah, there's almost a lack of alignment or integrity in some ways in that.
And it needs to be alignment up and down the organization on that front. And then we need to be able to say, you're going to have work-life balance. I've seen too many people burn out, and suddenly there's a gap in the organization where George used to be working and working really hard, and suddenly George has gotten sick physically because of the way he's been managing his life and his body. Maybe George has gone off on stress leave. Maybe George just said, I'm going to go work somewhere else, and gives you his notice, and he's gone, and now you've messed things up by the way you've treated people. It's not acceptable in our organization. And we're, as a culture, as a country, we're much more willing to let people leave than we are to work hard at getting them to stay. And we've even done things corporately by changing our pension plans. Things like, you used to have a pension plan that was a defined benefit and a person would know what they were going to get as they retired. And all the companies have moved to a defined contribution plan where you get something that's portable. When you leave one company, you carry it with you. Well, the advantage of that is it's portable, and the disadvantage of that is it's portable. And people are no longer committed to the company because companies didn't do a good job of delivering commitment to their employees.
So that's really interesting, that statement you said. We are better at letting employees leave versus retain them.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think we are better at that?
Well, why would it be that we're better at letting people move on than retain them? It's a lot of work to make people love their job and love their company. And perhaps we just don't have the energy to put into it because we're so busy chasing and running around trying to keep our balls in the air. And I found it to be a lot of work to replace people and took a lot of time. And so I would rather spend that energy keeping people than I would to spend that energy replacing people. So I worked hard at trying to keep my retention high. But at the same time, you have to develop people so that they're moving on to something new in the organization. So it's a little give and take on that front. Say, oh, I'm not going to give you training. I'm going to keep you in your little hole, in your little cubicle, and say, this is where you're going to work for the rest of your life, because that doesn't work. People will turn out and tune out pretty quickly.
So it is very much about the individual and their growth and balancing that with what the team or the leader or the organization wants.
I would always ask sincerely in performance review time, where do you want to go in this organization? And we would develop plans to make those things happen. But the number of times that an employee didn't have a plan for where they wanted to go and what they wanted to do in their career was quite surprising. And I think most managers will find that many employees don't put any time or thought into managing their own careers. But it's our responsibility to do that. If you want to get to there, you have to put the work in to get there.
Yeah, that's true. So my last question to you,
Sure.
I know we've spoken about a lot of different strategies people can use in the corporate world, but if there's one thing you think that needs to immediately change in the current corporate world, what is it, and how can people who are listening to this do something small to facilitate that change?
Oh, that's a tough question because there's so much that needs to change.
What's
And
the most immediate one, though?
most immediate one, I think what was very helpful to me when I was overwhelmed with the amount of work that was on my plate and the other things in my life that were interfering with my work was to do a brain dump, spend an hour and get everything that you are responsible for onto one piece of paper, and then prioritize it and say, these are the things that I must do. Every week, these things have to be done. I have to approve time cards, approve expense accounts, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that are non-negotiable that people have to do. Then there's priorities that are deliverables for your work. And then there's nice to-dos. And so I did all that. It took me an hour and a half, 2 hours to figure that all out and get it organized. And then I sat down with my boss and said, all this stuff here that's nice to do, that's got to wait. And he was very supportive of that and said, you're right, that's a nice to do, but these things are the things that we have to get done. And this other stuff here, that would be nice to do, but right now we can't do it. And so I eased off a lot of work off myself and off my team. So were able to focus on the key things and make the key thing the key thing, the main thing the main thing. So I think that was very helpful to me. It was a good exercise to do and say some stuff is going to get off our table so that we had a better work life and a better focus on our work.
There's so much power to getting something from your head into paper. And
Mhm.
I feel like even if it took a little longer, it makes sense to do that. And then also, I hear in what you're saying that you were able to use that after you put it down in paper as a communication tool with your leaders and even the overall team. So it's
Mhm.
really key that we all.
And it was very helpful when I went back to my team and said, look, this is the stuff that
Mm,
we've got to get done. And
mm.
this is the stuff we're going to let go for now. That gave them respect. And I think respect is one of my key values that allowed me to be successful with my staff.
And also, I think you mentioned a few examples of what you would put in there, proving things. Most leaders, or anyone, not just leaders, and it's a small task, we don't put it in, but the small tasks add up, and they're just another thing you need to do. Might as well put it down.
And then sometimes you find out that the thing that you were doing, nobody was reading. And is this weekly report worth doing? I had a job once where I was writing a weekly report. And so I got a new director and I stopped writing the report when the new guy joined the company and no one ever noticed that it was not needed. So I saved myself an hour of weekly report writing time and I
Yeah.
provided the information in another way.
So that's the thing. I think there's a lot of space for things like that, but to create those efficiencies, we need to take a step back and look at everything like you did with the brain
Mm.
dump.
I think taking a step back, having a pause and saying to yourself, what is it that I really need to get done?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that I really want to do? Those things were very helpful to me and I'm very helpful to others as I've coached them to help do that kind of thing.
Yeah, those two questions. What do I really need to get done? And what do I want to do in
Mhm.
this place? Yeah. David, so if anyone wants to connect further with you to continue this conversation or to dig in a little bit more into all of these strategies you've shared, is LinkedIn the best place to follow you, or are there other places?
Well, yes, LinkedIn is probably the best place to get in touch with me. I also have a website called breakingthroughcoaching.ca, and that's a way that you can reach out to me as well. But if somebody is interested in having a conversation, I'd be more than happy to do so. Or if they know of somebody that is not thriving in their work as a new and emerging leader, then if they're struggling, if they're feeling the stress of not having that good work-life balance, if they're
Hmm.
worrying about their performance, maybe I can help with helping somebody to manage those things and get to another level where they're happy.
Yeah, for sure. We will add the links to the wherever I post this as well. So everyone has access to the LinkedIn page and the coaching website as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I took a lot of notes. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else will as well. There were really practical things that people can do. And I think that is so much more valuable than talking about high level theories and abstract concepts. So thank you so much for taking the time. And I and the listeners, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
It's been my great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and took away something you can easily implement, because that is the goal here. Please subscribe and let us know if you have any questions or if you have additional tips and strategies, so we can all learn from each other and ignite this corporate change or revolution together.